So this morning, I'm sitting at my desk instead of out for a walk, and the reason is it's raining outside. It's actually quite cold. Normally, in my part of the world, as we approach May, it's usually quite warm, but today it's really cool. You can see I actually have on a jacket. What I want to talk to you about in this video is I want to talk to you about infant baptism. We have a number of baptisms coming up in the life of our church, and quite a few of those are for small children. And obviously, baptism's not something upon which every Christian agrees. There are some communions that will not baptize small children. There are some communities of faith that will only use immersion as the mode of baptism. And unfortunately, the disagreement over baptism has been going on for a very long time, and there's not enough data in the New Testament to be able to really show which side is right. But what I want to do is just show that infant baptism is a practice that goes back to the earliest days of the church, and that it actually has biblical warrant. And how can I show you that it goes back to the earliest days of the church? The easiest way for me to do that is to point you to Wikipedia, have you type in infant baptism, and there you're going to read that the first mention that we have of infant baptism is by a man named Irenaeus. Why is that important? Well, because Irenaeus is one of the few people that we call an apostolic father. In other words, he's an early church leader who knew the apostles, or at least one apostle. So Irenaeus was led to Christ by a man named Polycarp, and Polycarp was led to Christ by a man named John. And of course, we know John from the New Testament, and some of his writings are in the New Testament. So when Irenaeus mentions infant baptism, we're talking about a practice that goes all the way back to the beginnings of Christian faith. Now, again, not every Christian, even in the earliest days, would have been in full agreement about whether or not infant baptism was a legitimate practice, but some did. And what I want to do is I just want to quickly try to answer 6 of the objections that are often raised to infant baptism. And the first objection I hear all of the time is that infants are too young to understand baptism. And to that objection, I would just say, you're right. They are too young to understand, and they may not even remember the fact that it was done. In fact, most infants are not going to remember that moment. But here's the thing. There are a lot of things we do for our children that when we do them, we begin doing them before they understand and long before they will remember. So for example, we don't hesitate to tell our babies we love them, even though they may not be able to understand what that means, even though they're not going to remember the first time they were told they were loved. We're going to begin telling them from the very beginning of their life. In the same way, there's things we do like correcting children, and I don't remember when my parents taught me not to touch the hot stove top, or when they taught me not to stick my fingers in the electrical socket. But obviously, the lesson took. I don't go around sticking my fingers on a hot stove or in an electrical socket. So we do begin to instruct and do things for our children before they understand or can remember. Objection number 2. Children are too young to make their own decision about baptism. Again, that's absolutely true, but we make all kinds of decisions for our children before they're old enough to make those decisions for themselves. We make decisions for them about their name, about their education, about getting them vaccinated, about when their schooling starts. We make decisions about brushing their teeth and what they wear, and all kinds of things. In fact, that's actually the job of a parent, is to make those decisions until the child is capable of making them. We don't defer the decisions, but we make them for them until they're able to make them for themselves. Objection number 3. Some people who are baptized as infants will end up making that the whole center of their religious experience instead of ever really placing their faith in Jesus. Well, that problem is not unique to our tradition. Even in traditions where baptism is put off till later, say even into adulthood, there are some people that becomes the only thing that their religious faith is built on. I know people as adults who are baptized, and once they're baptized, they stop going to church, stop reading their Bible, and if you say anything about how that somehow maybe not consistent, they'll just say, well, look, I was baptized, I got saved, what else is there left for me to do? And I always like to say that would be a little bit like standing at the altar with your spouse to be, saying I do, taking your marriage vows, and then each of you getting in a separate car, going in different directions and never seeing each other again. I guess technically, in some way, you may be married, but the reality is not being reflected in your everyday life. So it is very easy for people to think that religious ceremonies, religious acts, even sacraments done once somehow it gives you an exemption from living the Christian faith. All I can say to that is that's not unique to infant baptism. That happens all the time. Objection number 4. Well, what happens if a child is baptized as a baby and then they grow up and they never claim the faith for themselves or reject the faith? Well, what I want to say is that does happen. But again, that's not unique to our tradition. That happens also in traditions where children are baptized much later. What's sad is that when a child is raised in a Christian home, the Christian faith is their heritage. It's not that God has grandchildren, but children who are raised in Christian homes are raised as Christian people, and they have that as their heritage. And if they don't claim it, it's very, very sad. And what I would say is that they're not pagans who never became Christians. They're Christians who became who apostatized, who walked away from the faith. So let me give you an example. One of my friends was raised in India. His parents were missionaries there, and he was raised in India. But the fact that his parents were United States citizens, it meant that even though my friend was raised in India, he was a United States citizen. Now, he did not see the United States until he was an adult, but because of his parents' relationship with the United States, he himself was a citizen. Now, here's the thing. At some point, that was his heritage to claim, right? But it could have been that my friend would have never had any interest in claiming that heritage at all. In fact, he could have rejected it and could have decided never to have visited the United States, never to have owned that citizenship. But it wouldn't have invalidated it. It would have just been a part of his heritage that he would have never claimed. And for children raised in the Christian home, especially for those who are baptized as infants, part of their heritage is the identity as a Christian. But if they don't claim it, it's simply sad. It's apostasy. It is neglecting something beautiful that's been done for them. Objection number 5. Isn't baby dedication more biblical? So one of my very, very best friends is a Baptist deacon, and I've been present for the dedication of all of his children. And I've been proud to be there for him because I know he loves the Lord and that it was his intent to raise his children in the Christian faith. So I was there to honor him and to honor my godchildren. But that said, I still think that infant dedication or baby dedication is an incomplete ceremony at best. Let me tell you why. When Baptists and Church of Christ and Pentecostal people dedicate their children, they think that they are imitating an Old Testament practice because weren't children dedicated in the Old Testament? And the answer is yes, they absolutely were. They were dedicated on the 8th day. But if you were male On the 8th day, you received the sign of circumcision, which was the sign of the Old Testament, of the Old Covenant. And your parents made a sacrifice in the temple on your behalf. So I've never seen a Baptist make a sacrifice, obviously, but if we were going to do a New Testament equivalent to this and give the child the sign of the covenant, what is the New Testament sign? What is the sign of the New Testament covenant? It is baptism. So if you're going to dedicate your child, then obviously the biblical model is when you dedicate them, you give them the sign of the covenant. And the sign of the covenant for New Testament people is baptism. And so if you don't give them the sign of the covenant, you haven't even completed the ceremony. And so what I want to say is that that in fact, when Methodists, Catholics, Orthodox Christians, Lutherans, Presbyterians, when we baptize children, we're actually doing something far closer to Old Testament dedication than our Baptist people. And in fact, that is actually why we baptize children, is because we believe that they are part of the covenant community, which is what the practice has been since the days of Abraham. Abraham did not treat his children as if they were outside the covenant community. In fact, God said, because they are part of the covenant community, if you neglect that, you yourself will be removed from the covenant community if you neglect to provide the sign of the covenant for your children. Finally, objection number 6. Isn't baptism something we do for God to show our dedication to Him? And for this, I just have to absolutely say, nope, no, wrong. Baptism is not something we do for God. Baptism is something God does for us. In that, it doesn't matter whether we're 1 month old or 99 years old. When we are baptized, it is not the gift we are giving God. It is the gift God is giving us. He is marking us as His children. He is marking us as one of His people. And so baptism is not about what we are doing for God. It is about what God is doing for us.